In this episode, we're going to take a look at Microsoft Entra ID, the directory service in Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Azure. How does it work? And more importantly, how can you get involved as a beginner? Stay tuned and you'll learn something. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Andy Malone, Microsoft MVP. So nice to see you this week. I really do appreciate it. Hey, listen, if you're a beginner in Microsoft world and you've not had a chance to take a look at Microsoft Entra ID, then this is a really good place to start. So in this video, I'm going to take you through everything that you need to know to understand exactly what Entra ID is, how to create users, how to create groups, and initially how to kickstart your career into IT. We're going to look at many of the different components and discuss exactly how they work and, more importantly, what they can do for you. Now, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, we would really appreciate it if you would click that subscribe button, ring the bell, and come on board and join my learning community. And if you've got any comments or questions, of course, I love those, so just get those down below. And finally, if you enjoy the video, please bump the like button up there. It really does make a difference. So I think without any further ado, let's jump in with some demos and talk about exactly what Entra ID is and how you can get involved. So first up then, what does the word Entra mean? Well, when we look at the French dictionary and the Portuguese dictionary here, we can actually see that it does mean the words to go in or to come in, which in essence means entry. So this takes us to the three kind of principles of identity. So identity means to identify oneself. So, for example, in a directory service or in an account service, you're going to have a means of identifying yourself. That could be a username, it could be a user ID, for example, your credit card number, but something that uniquely identifies you. Then you're going to need to authenticate. So traditionally, authentication was done by using PIN numbers or passwords, but this is not very secure these days. So in essence, we use multiple different methods of authentication, hence the term multi-factor authentication. So for example, you might use a mobile device, you might use a biometric such as your face or a handprint or a fingerprint. So we also have the third feature, which of course is authorization. So once you've been identified and authenticated, you're then authorized to gain entry and to perform a specific task for which you've been granted permission for. So I suppose the first place to start in Entra ID is with a little tour. So here we are in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center, and you can see that we have a number of categories. So primarily we have identity protection, identity governance, verifiable credentials, permissions management, and a new feature, global secure access, which is currently in preview. So today we're primarily focusing on identity. So I'm going to expand this menu and I'm going to come into an overview. And first of all, just to say, you'll notice that you've got various licenses that still relate to what we call Azure. Now, at the moment, Microsoft are currently doing a little bit of a rebrand. Now this is actually quite a good slide because it shows you that there are different versions of Entra ID. So everybody, by the way, can sign up for a free edition, and although it's a little bit basic, it is quite useful to have. We also have Azure AD Premium P1, which now becomes Entra ID P1. And this is included with most versions of Microsoft 365, including the E3 edition and business editions. Now with the Premium edition, certainly for the E3, you get features like conditional access And with the P2 edition, you also get the additional and excellent identity protection features which come with Microsoft Entra. In addition, the E5 edition, or P2, will give you additional security and functionality features. So continuing our tour in Microsoft Entra, let's take a look at what we can see. So you can see, I'm focusing really here on identity. I've got users, groups, devices, applications, roles and admins, billing information, and you've also got settings, which can include a preview hub. This just means beta features, so features that haven't been fully released yet, which is quite useful. You can also customize your own organization's domain name here. So out of the box, you get what we call a tenant. So you can see here that my tenant is just some kind of random number .onmicrosoft.com, which means essentially it's a bit like a filing cabinet in the Microsoft data center, and I've got a drawer with this name, and you're responsible really for managing your own tenant, and Microsoft look after the infrastructure and everything else. But we do appreciate that you might also want to add in your own domain name here. Now, if you are interested in that, check out my DNS video that I recently recorded, and I'll put the link below for that. All right. So other things that we've got then, of course, you've got the security and protection, and I'm going to cover that in a future video. But today it's all about the basics. And one of the first basic things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a user account. So to get started, I'm simply going to pop in here into the Entra Admin Center. I'm going to come into Identity. I'm going to expand users, and I'm going to click into all users. Now, just to mention that if there is any reference to Azure Active Directory in the portal, this will change because due to Microsoft's rebrand last week. Now, creating a user account is simple. If I come up here to new user, you could got two choices. I can either create a new user, which is essentially a member user in my directory, or alternatively, you can invite an external or guest user into your organization for the purposes of, let's say, collaboration. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new user here. And it's asking me, first of all, for a user principal name, or UPN. This is typically in the format of an email address. So I'm going to call my user Picard J. So I'm a big Trekkie, if anybody knows me. So Jean-Luc. So I'm going to put in a user or a display name here. I'm going to say Jean-Luc Picard. All right. So I'm putting in here a display name of Jean-Luc Picard. You can see it's auto-generating a password, and it's enabling the user account here. I can then say, let's go into the properties of the user account. So you might want to fill in some details for the user here. So you might want to put his a name. Again, you can choose whether you want him to be a guest or a member in the account. If you have a certificate, if you're authenticating the user by the use of a digital certificate, you can add that in here as well. And I'm going to assign him a job. I'm going to put him in the sales department. And of course, you can put in the location. I work in Oslo a lot, so I'm going to put in Oslo there in Norway. And if he has a manager, you can add that details in. And again, you can also fill in. I'm sure you get the idea. So we can add all of this information in. Just by the by, if you use a HR system that integrates into Entra ID, you'll probably find that when you add the user in the HR system, it will typically populate most of these fields for you. The other things that you've got, the one piece of advice I would say is you have a usage location. So the usage location is really useful because this informs Microsoft where you would like the user data to be stored. So this tenant is based in the US, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So next is assignments. So do I want to assign the user either to an administrative unit? So for example, if this user would be based in Oslo and we have, let's say, a dedicated administrator who is responsible for administering Oslo, we could add that user in here. Do you want to add the user into a group? So yeah, okay, so I could come in here to the various group types and let's say, for example, I want him to be added to the Oslo office group. So I can simply select that and I can add him into the office group. And of course, you can bring him into multiple groups as well. Now, the final thing that you might want Jean-Luc to do is have some kind of administrative role in the organization. So an admin role is particularly powerful. So the most powerful admin role that we have is something called a global admin. And a global admin can pretty much do anything that they want. But as you can imagine, if you had 50 administrators, the last thing that you want to do is you want to have 50 global admins. So we use something here called zero trust. And one of the principles of zero trust is making sure that you only give the users what rights and permissions that they actually need. So for example, in this case, you can see we have a whole bunch of different types of administrators. So for example, I could perhaps say, you know, Jean-Luc, I want Jean-Luc to be an exchange administrator. Now, if you don't assign an admin role here, he will just have regular user permissions. Okay. In this case, though, I'm going to assign Jean-Luc an exchange admin. Just a quick note, by the way, for administrator accounts, you do not need to assign a license for this. So even guests can be administrator accounts. So now that we've created our user, we can now just review this and off it goes, and it will now create this user account for us. So now that we've created the user account, we can now, of course, go in and have a look at the various properties of that account. So I'm going to just refresh the screen. Let's just do a quick refresh. And I'm going to come down here. And in here, you can see, sure enough, there's Jean-Luc Picard. If I click onto his account, you can now see that he's got all his attributes here. He's been configured. Now, the other things that we can do here, you can now see what groups he's got. I can assign applications to him. I can assign licenses. So perhaps one of the first things I suppose we should do is assign a license to Jean-Luc. And you can see it gives you a sample of licenses that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in a couple of licenses. I'm going to assign an E5 and an enterprise mobility and security feature. You can see that it assigns a number of different features and apps. Now, if you change your mind about any of these, I could just simply remove that particular app if I want him to not have that feature. So now that I've done that, I've assigned the user. Again, I can scroll down and I can now save that. And I've now created and licensed Jean-Luc Picard as a user in my directory. Now, of course, one question that I get asked is what happens if you don't need a user account anymore? So you can see here, I've got a user account called Bob Jones. So what happens if Bob leaves the company? Well, you can remove the license for the user and you can obviously back up the user's data, but ultimately you're going to probably want to delete that user account. So to delete a user account, you can simply select the user account here, go up to the menu bar here and choose to delete it and click OK, and that user account is now gone. And already you're thinking, oh my goodness, what if I've gone ahead and made a mistake? It's okay, don't worry. If you go into the deleted items container here, you can see that I've got my user here and he stays here for 30 days. So all of his data will stay here for 30 days. And of course, you can then restore that user back. Now, of course, the other options are you can place the user on legal or litigation hold, which means the user account technically could not be deleted. And I've covered that in my Exchange videos, so definitely have a look at that. But for now, I simply want to restore this user back, and everything that this user was has now been restored back into all users. Now, so that's user accounts basically. So we've created, we've deleted, and we've restored a user account here. Something else that you definitely want to take a look at are groups. So groups can be created in Azure Active Directory. And if you're interested in creating groups in Microsoft 365, then check out my admin videos on Microsoft 365. Today, though, I'm just really focusing on Entra ID. So I'm going to come up here to groups, and in groups here, we have two choices. You can either create a security group, which is just used for permissions, or you can create what we refer to as a Microsoft 365 group, otherwise known as a fully collaborative group. Okay. So for this demo, I'm going to create a Microsoft 365 group, and I'm going to call this group, I'm going to call this my Oslo Tech Project. So I'm calling this my Oslo Tech Project. Do you want to assign an admin role to a group? So you saw me how I could assign an admin role to a user. And you can say, yes, I would love to assign an admin role. And what's happened here is that's just flagged this, which means that I can now assign an administrative role to this group. So any users within the group would get that admin role. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to say no. And now it says, would you like to assign the membership, or would you like to use a dynamic user rule? Well, I'll tell you what, I'll show you both. So I'm going to say assignment. And by the way, you can also, depending on your license, assign a sensitivity label to the group. So this is like top secret, or what kind of group is it? Now, one of the things you want to do in Entra is you probably want to assign an owner to the group. So an owner is particularly useful as a manager or as an owner, and that means that he or she can then add other members into the group or invite members to the group. So for the purpose of this demo here, I've got a user here just called CDX. So I'm just going to bring in this. I will just bring in this user here. And I'm just going to use the Microsoft CDX as the owner. And I can now, because I've chosen to assign members to the group, I'm going to assign some members. So I'm going to bring in Adele, Alex, and Alan. I'll bring in Bob Jones, of course. And I think we should also bring in our friend Jean-Luc Picard. So I'm going to click on Next or Select, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Create. So that is my group. I've gone ahead and created a group, and I've assigned a group membership. What about the other option? Let's have a look at this. So I'm going to create a new group. I'm going to create, this time I'll create a security group. I'm calling it my Oslo Techies. And this time though, I'm going to, do you notice because it's a security group, you can have an assigned member, a dynamic user or a dynamic device. So this is often used in deployment. So if you're using the likes of Microsoft Intune, you can use dynamic devices to do dynamic deployments of software or hardware and so on. For this demo, I'm going to choose a dynamic user. Again, I can put in a owner for the group. Okay, so again, I'll just put in the same owner again, but instead of adding members to my group this time, I'm going to add in a dynamic query. So you can choose any of the properties of the user accounts. So for example, I'm going to say department equals, I'm going to say IT support, okay, and I'm adding another expression, and I'm saying for the city equals Oslo. Okay, so you can see here if the user is in the department in IT support and they're also in Oslo, they will get added dynamically to the group. And of course, if they change city or department, they will then leave the group. Just think how powerful that feature is. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save that and I'm going to create that. So to enforce that rule now, I simply come up to my user accounts again, and this time I'm going to scroll down, and here's our friend Jean-Luc Picard. I'm going to come into Jean-Luc's account, and this time I'm going to come in and edit his properties. And here's all Jean-Luc's properties, you see? So again, I can scroll down. He's in Oslo. That's good. And we can then put in the department. So I'm going to change him from the sales department into IT support. Now when I click on save, Jean-Luc is now a member of that dynamic group. How cool is that? All right, that is super powerful. And there you go. Just a little word about how groups work. Now, so far we've talked about Microsoft Entra ID. We've talked about creating and managing, deleting and restoring user accounts. I've talked a little bit about the admin roles and also about how to manage groups. One of the most important topics I suppose we should have a chat about is security. So for this, I'm simply going to come down here into the identity. I'm going to click onto overview. Now, if this is a new tenant, one of the most important things, of course, is being secure. So if I come into the properties here of my tenant and simply scroll down, we have something here called security defaults. And what the security defaults are, these are essentially a baseline, a security baseline. Now, please be warned, if you have any conditional access policies or any security enforced, they will be wiped out if you switch this on. All right. So, however, if it's a new tenant, so you've just created a brand new tenant, you've not really set up the security, then enable this and it's brilliant. Okay. So that's the security defaults. So we talked a little bit about identity. We now need to talk a little bit about authentication and authorization. So now I'm going to come down to the Protection tab in the Entra ID Admin Center, and I'm going to come into, first of all, Authentication methods. So the authentication methods are a list of acceptable methods that you're going to allow your users to use in order to authenticate or prove who they are. So you can have something called a FIDO key, and a FIDO key is essentially a key that enforces things like passwordless authentication. These are going to be rebranded, by the way, as passkeys, so watch out for those. So I'm sure you'll be aware of the Microsoft Authenticator app. It's been out for quite some time and everybody can download this on their device. So I can deploy this to selected groups here or all my users. And during that configuration, I can click onto the configuration tab and I can say, do you want to allow the use of the authentication one-time passcodes? I'm sure you've seen those. In fact, they're now default. Also, when a user authenticates using the app, for example, multi-factor authentication, it will show the application name that the user is trying to authenticate and the location. This is an additional layer of security. So if somebody's trying to use your account in, let's say, New Zealand to get into one of your apps, you will see right away and you'll know, hey, that's not me that's trying to use this app and I'm not in New Zealand, and you would then reject it. So this, I find this a really useful authentication method. Of course, you can also use SMS messages as well as authentication. You can use a voice call, you can email one-time passcodes, and you can also use certificate-based authentication as well. So this means, for example, a user's using a mobile device, they need to have a digital certificate on that device deployed in addition to any other authentication method. An important member of the Entra ID family is something called Verified ID or Verified Identity. This is based on a very different kind of authentication method, and it involves something called a digital ID or DID. And this technology, essentially, you can use it on your phone, you can store it in your Apple Wallet, and once you've been issued with a DID, it absolutely guarantees that you are who you say you are. So because it's been verified by a trusted source. Here's a really cool demo I'll walk you through. So to configure Entra verifiable credentials, we simply come into the Entra ID Admin Center and the first port of call here is Setup. Now you'll need to go in and update your organization settings. You'll need to register your digital identity from the trusted source, and essentially then you'll verify that you own the domain name by importing a text record into your DNS. Once you've done that, you can then take advantage of how digital IDs work. And this is a really nice kind of scenario. So the scenario here is that I've joined the Woodgrove Bank, and the first thing I need to do is I need to verify who I am using the True Identity website. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to verify myself using the website. And again, I'm using my mobile device here. So first things I'm going to do is I'm going to take a selfie. So it updates the selfie, and I'm going to upload my government issued ID. So passport, identity card, whatever it is you're using. And it then verifies the information that I've sent them. So it looks good so far. So now it's going to say, okay, you want to scan the QR code. So I'm just using my mobile device and I'm scanning the QR code. It's going through MFA, multi-factor authentication, and it's now asking me to confirm the PIN that I see on screen. Okay, so there we go. And you can now see that it's now issued me with my verified ID, which I'm now going to add to my wallet. Okay, so once you've added that to your wallet, it just takes a second just to do that. Okay, so my ID has now been uploaded to my wallet. I can now return to the bank. So first of all, the bank now knows that I am who I say I am, and now I can actually go ahead and request access to my corporate identity card. So again, to do this, we just take a picture of the QR code. So I'm just taking a picture of that QR code. Again, it does multi-factor authentication. And this time it's saying, hey, do you want to share your true identity, your identity with Woodgrove Bank? And I'm going to say, yes, I am. That's absolutely fine. So I'm going to continue onboarding, and I want to now retrieve my verified ID. So this is my corporate ID card, if you will. So again, I'm just doing multi-factor authentication, unlocking the ID, and again, it will ask me for a code here. So I'm just going to put that in. Yeah, and next. So now it's issued me with my corporate identity card for the bank. Okay, and that's gone into my digital wallet, as you can see. So very similar to, you know, the way that you would use your Apple Wallet or your credit cards and so on. The nice thing now that I have my card is, what can I actually use it for? So, of course, joining a new company, I'm going to need a new mobile device. So I can simply come in here and I can choose my mobile device, and you can see, hey, but you know, I want to maybe access some discounts here because it's quite expensive. So it says, hey, you know, that's fine, but you need to verify that you actually work for Woodgrove Bank, but that's okay. I don't need to put my credentials in. I can verify my employee credential. So again, all I simply do is, again, take a picture of the QR code, use multi-factor authentication, and what this is now doing is it's now checking my corporate ID, and it's saying, hey, do you want to share your corporate credentials with the retailer, okay, in order to receive the discount? So I'm going to say, yes, I do. And it says, now I'll return to the laptop, and you can now see that it's provided me with my discount. Now, the cool thing about this is you're in control of this. So at any point, I can come into the ID, I can see exactly where it's been issued, who it's been issued to, and I also get to see every single transaction. So a complete history of everything. And that is the power of verified credentials. So there you have it, just a little bit on Microsoft Entra ID, Microsoft's premium directory service. We've talked about how to get started by creating the different tenants. We've talked about the different subscription models that you can have. We've talked about creating users. We've talked about the two different types of groups, so assigning them. We've talked about dynamic membership, and we've talked about things like admin roles. What are the admin features, and a little bit of licensing, and not to mention things like the verifiable credentials, which is super cool, by the way. All right. Hey, listen, I really hope you enjoyed that session with me. And if you did, please give me a big thumbs up. It really does help. And if you've not subscribed, hell, come on board. There's so many of you not subscribing. Bump that subscribe button, ring the bell, and come and join my learning community. And I really appreciate you joining me this week for a look at Microsoft Entra ID. That's it for today. You stay safe. I'll see you next time. Thanks. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.